Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala sayyidil awwaleen wal akhirin. Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. All praise are due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last, and upon his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, I begin with the greeting words of the righteous. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, this is another great opportunity that Allah has afforded us to reflect upon His mercy and His guidance and reflect upon the experiences that people are going through. And as we begin this course, here we find ourselves in February, and I would be remiss not to remember and reflect upon what is happening to the Muslims in Turkey and in Syria. And we lift our voice and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy upon them and to make it easy for them, and to accept any of them who have passed away as shuhada, as martyrs, and enter them into paradise. See if you can get that water. Alhamdulillah, we recognize at the outset the importance of history itself. And after studying the Quran and the Sunnah, some of your root subjects within Islamic studies, I believe that history, perspective, is one of the most important subjects that Muslims need today. Because in many cases, we are like, as the Quran describes, donkeys with books on our backs. We memorize Quran, we memorize Hadith, but how to apply it to the circumstances you're living in, how to understand the right move to make, this takes perspective. And that is the reason why when you're studying the Quran itself, they have what is called asbab al-nuzul, and that is the reason why it was revealed. So when you understand the reason why, the time period, the circumstances, it changes the understanding of the verse or of the chapter, sometimes almost completely. And so understanding the perspectives, understanding what they call today context. Now, at the beginning of any history course, we normally reflect a little bit, because our context and our perspective has been shaped by the mass media and by the educational system. And this is what is called Eurocentrism. And Eurocentrism is where people center themselves in Europe. And they take on a set of values that have been made up, for the most part, or a set of concepts that are not necessarily in line with history or reality, but the way it is presented and the amount of times that it comes makes it seem like reality. And as they would say, if you tell a lie enough times, it becomes a truth. And so Eurocentrism is where Europe becomes the center. And for instance, we look at, and we say it, that the northern countries in Europe are like the civilized. They even say first world, and then they talk about the other countries as like third world. So third world is usually underdeveloped, not as organized. But the more you go north is the more organized you are and civilized and structured. This is something which is in our psyche. And sometimes we say things, and it's not necessarily wrong, because we're victims. But we say things based upon that, not realizing that we have an inferiority complex. And sometimes the people coming from these countries have a superiority complex. I mean, I noticed this even in Medina. I was in Medina in the 70s, living in the Harra, Gharbiya, with Bedouins. And the Bedouin came, and we were talking as friends. And so he said, "Where are you from?" He thought I was an Egyptian or Moroccan or something. So he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from America, and I'm in America." And he said, "La, no, you're not from America." He had started watching television too, right? So he was a little brainwashed as well. I said, "No, I'm from America." And he said, "No." Then he said, "Okay, you're from South America." Because he couldn't accept the fact, if you're a little color, you look different, you're not a white man, Superman, Wonder Woman, the hero of all the programs. How can you be from America? You see, and the Bedouin didn't realize how brainwashed he is, and how the fact that the Europeans only came to the Americas only a few hundred years ago. So it's a complete reversal of reality. It's a complete changing up of history. And so, for instance, we accept Greenwich Mean Time as being like, you do your times from the Greenwich Mean Time. And I went to Greenwich one time in London. It's just a little college, a little place, and little second. It's nothing. But that's like the center of how people think in terms of their numbers and whatever. And then they say, "Where are you going?" So they say, "I'm going to the Middle East." Okay, so you're going from the Middle East. Middle from where? Right? If you live in Lebanon or Arabia, are you in the Middle East? Then they say, "No, let's go to the Far East." Okay, so but if you live in China, are you in the Far East? No, you're in the center of the world. You see? But if you lived in London, in Europe, it's far away. You see, so we use the term, even Arabic, Ash-Sharq al-Awsat, we will say the Middle East. We will use these terminologies and don't even realize that we are being affected by Eurocentrism. And so what needs to be done is that we have to deconstruct information. You have to literally take information apart and put it back together. And this is a process that is going on, and people will not be fully liberated until they have deconstructed their own histories. And that's people from everywhere. Deconstructed their own histories and then brought it back, putting things in the proper perspective. This is not to disclude Europe. Europe's involved, but put them in the proper place. Okay, when countries in Africa and Asia were civilized for thousands of years, Europeans were just coming out of caves. They were living very simple life. And that's just the reality. Okay, so this perspective, we are looking at this subject in a sense from not just Eurocentric, or you could say Afrocentric, because some people want to send themselves Africa. You could say, in a sense, Mecca-centric. So in a sense that our center is Mecca, right? We center ourselves with the prophets, and our perspective comes from out of that perspective, trying to be as objective as possible. Because the reality is that if you don't know your history, you're actually lost in the present. You don't really know what's happening to you. And it's difficult to chart a course as to which direction you're going in. So this is, in a sense, our methodology, that we want to center ourselves in our own traditions and in our country and with the prophets. And from there, we look at the facts, the things that happened in history. Recently, at the end of 2022, the World Cup took place in Qatar. And I'm not really a soccer fan or a football fan. I came from America, we played basketball. And plus, I had serious doubts in terms of the amount of money that was actually being spent on the World Cup relative to the poverty in the Muslim world. But something happened during this World Cup. Something came out, certain issues came out, and even to a certain extent, dawah was being done. Hundreds of people actually embraced Islam. because the Qatari government took a stand and did not allow alcohol to be served, and people had to have respect. They even gave out information about Islam and showed Islamic etiquettes, and so literally hundreds of people were embracing Islam. And during the World Cup, there were certain games that had a big impact in the Muslim world and other places. And one of the greatest impacts probably was when Morocco defeated Spain. And of course, every country, the way they've built up soccer now to be, everybody goes crazy because their team kicked the little ball, into the net. And everybody, really feels good because in a sense it's your nation, like your identity. But there was something different about the Morocco defeating Spain. And as a historian who has gone to Spain many times and studied the history of Morocco and Spain in details, I could understand what was actually happening here. And and so what we want to do is to begin to peel away the layers of history to help you to understand the significance of this particular game, this concept, what's going on. And one of the players, Hakimi was his name, he was actually born in Spain. He's a Moroccan, but he was born in Spain. And his mother was like a servant, like a house maid, in Spain. And that's where he grew up, although he's a Moroccan, and he identifies with Morocco. And so there's a connection between the two. And after that, Morocco defeated Portugal. And this was overwhelming for people. Because if you know the Iberian Peninsula, and we'll be studying it, you see Spain and you see Portugal, it's actually part of the same peninsula. Okay, and we'll be looking at it in more details as we go along. But the impact on the people in Morocco and in the Muslim world, it was amazing. We're losing, we're feeling defeated in many cases. And this was a victory. And the fact that it was Spain and then Portugal, that really caused people to be weeping, grown men to be crying and weeping. And people who do not know the history, do not understand what Moroccans and Spanish have gone through. They will not understand the bitterness of these tears, the tears of joy, and the just emotions that were involved in that. So we want to try to understand Morocco and Spain. And to do that, we need to have an idea. Our background is to look at the Mediterranean region. And this is a modern day map of the Mediterranean region. And you can see actually that although it's considered to be a sea, so it's not a little lake, but still it is compact. And you can see on your left side over by Spain and Morocco, okay, there's a little straits, the Straits of Gibraltar, to enter in. So it's like you're entering into an area, and now it opens up. And the coastline that goes, for instance, if you turned right, Morocco, then you see Algerian coastline, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, all that coastline, and then Palestine and Israel on this coastline, Lebanon, Syria. Okay, so these countries are connected. And when you go out a little bit, look at Tunisia, and then look where Sicily is. So Sicily is the big island just below Italy. Okay, that's Sicily. And Sicily actually used to be called Siqiliya. That's actually an Arabic word. And it was controlled by Muslims for hundreds of years. And the distance between Sicily and another island called Malta, which doesn't show here, but it's very close, to Libya and Tunisia, very close. It's very close. And if you go back to Spain, right along the coast of Spain there, relative to Morocco, especially where you see where the straits are, just there, I can recall driving along the coastline, Costa del Sol they call it, in Morocco, from a place called Malaga, and then you're moving along the coastline, Marbella and places like that. And on a clear day, as you get close to Gibraltar, you can see Morocco. You can see it. It's right in front of you. Okay, now, of course, seeing and going across is not the same. But the fact that you can see it, that's how close they are to each other. So this is not the Atlantic Ocean. This is not Pacific Ocean. This is, in a sense, a stone's throw from each other. So there's a connection. And if you follow it around again by Rome and then Greece, and then you'll see in Europe how close they actually are to the other islands. And now, when you look at Greece and then Turkey, right, and then you see the coastline there, you will see that it's like the same territory. And a lot of people don't realize that Mediterranean people are so close in culture that, for instance, Turkey, in Turkey itself, there's the famous story of Troy and the fall of Troy, the Greeks and Troy. Troy is in Turkey, not in Greece. Okay? And that's shocking for a lot of people. But you have to remember that Greece controlled the Anatolia, that whole peninsula, for hundreds of years. It was being controlled by the Greeks or by the Romans. That was their land until the Turks, actually, came in, to this area. So it's very close. You look at Turkey, and you look at Syria, Lebanon. So the Mediterranean, in a sense, is a basin. And trade has been going on from time immemorial. So therefore, the people in their lifestyle, they share their culture. They sometimes share their language. They sometimes, in many cases, they have intermarried. And even in their food, they say a Mediterranean diet. So a Mediterranean diet generally has feta cheese and olives and, different, light olive oil, and what they call a Greek salad is actually Turkish salad. And so many of the things that they use and they claim to be Greek is actually Turkish or something. In other words, it's all intertwined. And so this is important to understand when we are looking at this part of the world, because there's a tendency to think that Europe is like far away and that Africa, because this is North Africa, right? It's not a distance. It's actually very close. And when you go back in time, for instance, we have our maps today, and you look at all the countries that are there, Greece and Bulgaria, and Italy, but at one point in time, the Roman Empire, which is the green here, it controlled just about the whole of the Mediterranean. It was controlled by the Romans. So history changed a lot of things. The Greeks were very powerful at one point too, but the Romans probably had the greatest control over the whole region, and a lot of things happened under their influence. And surprisingly enough, the greatest areas of the Roman culture was not in Italy. It was actually in North Africa. The largest colosseums, which are still there today, are in Libya and in Tunisia and in Algeria. Because the Romans, became Roman territory, and the land of Algeria and these places, it's really fertile land. And Morocco, it's really fertile land. And so the Romans planted their agriculture there. They kept their key city of Rome in Italy. But actually their greatest holdings was in North Africa. And what you have to realize now, with power, moving around, and especially under Roman influence, it is being concentrated and organized. We have to think about the background to what happened in Morocco and Spain. You need to understand the background, because you cannot really separate Morocco and Spain from the rest of the Mediterranean. Okay, they've made it into little countries now, but it is really connected together. So there were three powerful individuals in terms of people's thinking in the region, and I'm talking about the region at the time of BC, just before Isa alayhi salam, just after him, without going way back into thousands of years. But there were three important individuals that we need to understand the culture. Number one was Dionysus. And Dionysus, you remember the Greek gods. The Greeks had many different gods. Okay, so Dionysius, his father was Zeus, right? And they considered him to be a god. And his mother was Semele, and she was a human being. This is, of course, their myth. And so he combined the so-called godlike characteristics with human characteristics. And he had a dual appeal. He was almost what you could call two-faced. He had one face for certain events. He had another face for other events. Okay? And under his thinking, he had morality, a set of laws were there in terms of how they function. But at the same time, on a personal level, he was extremely immoral. Now, you see this still happening today in European culture and American culture, where you find the person is the president or the prime minister and whatever. But if you look at their personal life, they're actually criminals or they're perverts. But yet, politically, they're the president or they're the prime minister. It's like a dual type of character. So Dionysius has got this type of personality. And within his cult, the people that directly were influenced by his thinking, they had free drinking of alcohol, free sex, ecstasy, love, all these types of things they were heavily involved in. And this was the cult of Dionysius. There was no special diet. You're free to eat whatever you want. No circumcision or anything like this. It was sort of a open type of society. The second influence, and this may be one of the greatest of the influences in the Mediterranean region, that is especially important to us, and that was the secret religion of Mithras. Mithras. And this is a name that you need to look up to understand the Mediterranean region. It still impacts us today. And his group, it actually began in Persia, because the Persian Empire was a mighty empire with philosophers and with so many things. And Mithras's teachings began to spread. There were military conflicts between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire over the centuries. At the same time, they shared a lot of their cultures. Okay, so the cult of Mithras appealed to military people. And then it spread into the general population. Now, think about this personality. Don't think of any of the religions today. And think about this personality. His father was divine. His mother was human. He's considered to be the savior of humanity. Like he died for the sins of people. He had a virgin birth, and his birthday was on December 25th. Okay? And according to their teachings, he was crucified, and he was buried, and he was resurrected. Now, these teachings are long before Jesus, right? Long before Jesus' time. He was resurrected. Okay, and his holy day was the seventh day of the week that they call Sunday. Sunday. Okay, that we now say Sunday. But it was the day of the sun. Because in a sense, he was representing that sun god, that is, coming from the divine of his father. His followers actually, they would take a communion type of thing where they would eat a wafer and with wine, and they would say they would eat his body and drink his blood and whatnot. And this is something which is carried over in the Christian church today. It's not the Protestants don't do it, but the Catholics and the Anglicans and Episcopalians, they do this communion. And I grew up in a Christian church myself. And as a young person, I went to it was Episcopalian, so it's like Anglican. And we went to the priest, and he had a little biscuit. And he said, take this. This is the body of Christ that has been shed for you. And then he said, take this wine with it. Take it. This is the blood of Christ that has been shed for you. And when the wine mixed with the wafer, and it makes the wafer soggy, it actually felt like skin with blood on it. Because the wafer became soggy like skin, right? So it's like you're literally eating flesh with blood. And that was strange to me, because I had just finished watching vampire stories and other things like this. I said, how can this be religion? Okay? But this is a concept that was carried from before the time of Isa alayhi salam. And the average Christian does not know this. So Mithras, or Mithra sometimes pronounced, is an extremely important person, to these cults, the people during this time. The third question.
What does the picture represent?
The picture is actually, I looked it up, this is Mithras himself, supposedly in the picture. He's rising up, and it's like a bull. It's a bull that's there. And, this is like his birth and his growth, but this is an actual picture of Mithras itself. It's difficult to find, Shukran, it's difficult to find pictures of him, because the church actually made it prohibited to have anything to do with Mithras, because they knew what was going to happen, right? So they struck it out. You could not use that name. And it's only now it's coming back because people have more access to information. Question?
So what is the connection between Mithras and Christianity and Jesus? How did they...
Let's go on now. I'm giving you the background. Right? We're going to work our way into it so you can see what actually happened. The third major influence, in terms of individuals, this was in the area of Egypt. And ancient Egypt was actually a powerful part of the world. And the Greeks, they said, we got our science, we got our understanding from the Egyptians. And they were dark-skinned people with curly hair. That's what the Greeks were, not racist. And they recognized that, because the ancient Egyptians, who were African people, had reached pinnacle, the Great Pyramid of Egypt, right? And you're talking about something that was built like 2,000 years before Greek culture started. The Great Pyramid was millions of blocks of stone, 2,300,000 blocks of granite. Okay? No cement. The corners of the pyramid are perfect right angles. Talk about math, right? Perfect right angles. The Pythagoras theory, all the different theories of math came out of the Egyptians, and the Greeks admitted it. It's only the racist people now who will try to say math started with the Greeks. Science, philosophy started with the Greeks. Greek culture kicked in, it started functioning around 800 to 600 BC. The Great Pyramid, the first pyramids that were built, was actually 2,600 BC, 2,000 years before Greek culture actually even started functioning. The Egyptians had already built probably one of the greatest structures ever built by human beings. Because up until today, it's still there. What building can last that long. Think about it. If we have a building 100 years old in Canada, it's a national monument. The Historic Society, right, puts it because it's 100 years old. These buildings are like, 4,000 years old, and they're still there. Now, they had many belief systems within Egypt. And Allah said clearly in the Quran that He has sent prophets and messengers to every nation and every tribe. And there's a misunderstanding amongst Muslims that Egyptians was only the Pharaoh and whatever. There was like hundreds of pharaohs. There was a particular Pharaoh at the time of Moses, Musa alayhi salam, who wanted to be worshipped as God. But there were other pharaohs before who actually believed in one God. So there was a struggle in Egypt between believers in one God, believers in themselves, or many gods, just like the struggle happened in many parts of the world. One of the beliefs that was common amongst the Egyptians, especially in what they call the Middle Kingdom, which is going around 1500 BC or so, that's the cult of Horus. Horus. And according to their concepts, the father was Osiris, the mother was Isis, and the son was Horus. And they had Trinity, a Godhead, which was a Trinity made up of Father, Son, and Mother. Okay, so they had a Trinity concept that was there. Even the ancient Hindus actually had a Trinity. So the Trinity concept was there, and surprisingly enough, Isis, and this is an actual sculpturing of Isis, and you see Isis with the child, and then you see early pictures of Mary, because the early pictures of Mary, she was actually color. She wasn't a white woman. Because the Semitic people were people of color. But anyhow, whether you make her with pink cheeks or not, the concept is Mary and the baby, right? Look at Isis and Horus. See how she's holding the baby? It's the same thing. And supposedly she bore the baby in a divine conception. And one of the great philosophers of the Greeks, who died around 348 BC, was Plato. And Plato had a Trinity concept for the Godhead. And he called it the first cause, right? And then the reason, or the logos, right? Which would be like the sun. And the Spirit, which would be the Holy Spirit. So the first cause is the Father. So Plato had a Trinity concept. So the idea of Trinity was also there in the ancient world. And so what was happening is that the Mediterranean region had a lot of different concepts that were moving around at the time when Isa alayhi salam was born. And in the time of Isa, his followers were called Nazarenes. And we say in Arabic, An-Nasara. An-Nasara. And what the Nazarenes means is the Jews of Nazareth. Because the town of Nazareth, Jesus was Jewish. He was following the law of Moses, and he said clearly, I came not to change the law of Moses, but to fulfill the law. Very clear. Okay? And his followers were Nasara, the Nazarenes. And he was a person who was observant of the Torah, very much observant of the Torah. He was considered to be an inspired teacher. He spent his middle years with a group called the Essenes, who were like, radical rabbis in the desert, Sinai Peninsula. And so he was a teacher. Later on, a prophet, an inspired prophet. That's how he came relative to his people. And so the Nazarenes they were right in your Mediterranean. Okay? So you see your Mediterranean region. So now this is belief in one God that is coming up in the Mediterranean. Before that, you had Egypt, you had Greece, Rome, producing different thoughts moving all around. But now, this belief is coming out of this area. And later on, we'll study what happens with Paul. But right now, you'll see that the followers of Isa alayhi salam, they were very strong in the area of Syria and our Lebanon and Palestine, all these areas. And then Egypt, they were very strong in this area. And another group developed in the north. Now, how did this other group develop? Jesus had 12 disciples. And these disciples were all Jewish, by the way. Every one of his followers were Jewish. No Gentiles. Gentiles mean like the non-Jews. Every one of them was Jewish. And he was mainly bringing them back to the Torah and the spirit of the Torah. Now, some of the Jews who didn't agree with his teachings, they started to attack him, and they wanted to turn him into the Romans and make him considered to be like a radical teacher. And one of the worst enemies was a person named Saul. And Saul was Jewish himself. And he was very close to many of the disciples, especially one of the disciples whose name was Barnabas. Okay, you may have heard of some of these names, if you study things about Christianity. But Barnabas was very close to Saul. Now, Saul was on the Damascus road, and he claimed he had a vision. And he said he saw like Jesus coming, and he was reborn. And he claimed that he was inspired by Jesus. And he changed his name to Paul. So the name Paul that you hear in Christianity originally was Saul. Okay? And he started changing the teachings. He started saying that, the message of Jesus, it's not exclusive to the Jews. This message can go to other people. Now, of course, the Jews were supposed to provide an example to other people. But the laws of the Torah, this was something that was tailor-made for them. He also said that you can follow other laws. Take the best of all worlds. And this is what we would call today, in Islam, anybody know? Bid'ah. You hear this word, kullu bid'atin dalala, right? It'll take you innovation, right? Okay, so he was bringing in innovations. Now, it is said he was very close to Barnabas, and Barnabas, when he heard he was inspired, brought him to the disciples. The disciples rejected him and kicked him out. They want nothing to do with him. Some people say it is because they remember him as Saul, and he used to torture them. But others say no, it's because of these innovations. He was taking them away from the teachings of Isa alayhi salam. And his concept, if you look at the two movements, the Jesus concept was Torah observant. He was an inspired teachings. It was the religion of Jesus coming from the law of Moses. But Paul, they looked at Jesus as a cosmic figure. He was a savior who died, resurrection. So it was the religion about Jesus. So there's a difference between the two. You see, and this is where Paul's teachings come in. And Paul left with Barnabas, and they went to Greece. After a short time, Barnabas left him, probably because he couldn't stand his teachings, right? So he eventually left him and came back. Paul stayed and taught amongst the Greeks, and eventually he was killed for his teachings. And Paul's followers were then given the name Christians. So this is the first time that the followers were actually called Christians. Before that time, they were Nazarenes and Nasara. They were known as Jews, but the particular brand of Judaism, it was the one of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay? Now, you're a Christian. So a Christian now starts to look at other religions. You have the Dionysius thinking, you have Mithras, you have Horus. So they're now picking and choosing from different concepts and different ways of life. And no doubt, it was difficult to be a Christian in Rome at the time. Because when the Romans wanted to entertain their people, they brought them to the Colosseums. And they would bring Christians there and feed them to the lions. Just imagine 20,000 people watching a hungry lion or hyena tear a family apart. They're cheering for it, okay, in the Colosseums. We have changed a little bit. We have the Super Bowl today. So the football players tear each other apart. Concussions, right? Some of them are dropping down, heart attacks, whatever. But that's a gladiator. It's a gladiator spirit, you see? So it was difficult to be a Christian during those times. And so, as they say, when in Rome, do like the Romans do. That was one of their sayings. If you can't beat them, you know the rest of it? Join them. If you can't beat them, join them. You see? This is how this came about, because this is a good question you're asking. How can you go from the Torah, very strict belief in one God, strict kosher food, and how do you go to this religion that has Easter and Santa Claus, and it has all these wild things, but you call yourself a Christian, a follower of Jesus? How can you do that when Jesus was so much different? This is the process. It started with Paul. Paul opened the door because he claimed that he was inspired by Jesus. So he had permission to do this. But for us, he would not have had the authenticity, because we have the Prophet, his companions are called Sahaba. And a Sahabi is somebody who lived in the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and he had faith in the Prophet's time. That's so he's called Sahabi, right? The person who lived in the time of the Sahaba and had faith is called Tabi'i, right? And the next is Tabi'i. But if you were living in the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and you did not have faith, and you accepted Islam in the period of the Sahaba, they would call you a Tabi'i. Because you're not the same as the Sahaba. You did not experience him. And experiencing him is totally different. It's like biting an apple or just looking at it. You see, so you cannot consider the people to be the same. But Paul had a claim. And this struggle was going on in the Mediterranean. Those who believed in many gods, the Greek god, the Roman god, Horus, Dionysius, Mithras, all types of things they were believing in. Christians are running around, confused as to what they should do, until an individual came along who wanted to organize everything. And his name was Constantine. Constantine is a very important person. And if you have Christian friends, or if you get into a debate with Christians, and this thing comes up about, why Christianity, this is your man. Because Constantine, he took over as the Roman emperor. Now, Rome as we knew it was based in Italy, right? Rome. But the Germanic people and the Eastern European, the Huns, Turkic people, they call barbarians, attacked them and destroyed Rome. So the power of Rome was lost, and many of their artifacts and their books, they transferred them over to another city called Constantinople. And Constantinople was the city of Constantine. He founded this city. So he's an extremely important person. But Constantine was a sun worshiper. And sun worship was one of the most powerful forms of worship at the time. Because the sun is the largest object. So most of these religions end up somehow with the sun. Even the Christmas tree, they would say, when they build their Christmas tree, you always have a big light on the top. That's the sun. Right? Because the sun is what gives us life and it gives us heat. Okay, so sun worship was a powerful religion, but Christianity was coming in now. And Constantine wanted to organize this. And then he found in the ancient Egyptians a cross. Now this is one of the earliest crosses. It's called the Ankh. You'll find this in pyramids in Egypt, 3,000 years, way back. It's called the Ankh. It was the symbol of eternal life. Okay? Now, he also built, Constantine, he built the largest cathedral in the world. That is called the Hagia Sophia. And this is a huge structure. This was not built by the Turks. Okay? The Turks built masjids similar to this. But the first masjid, the Turks were very simple people. They were nomadic people. They were coming out of Asia. And they were moving along, with nomadic people. And then one of the groups took on Persian culture called Seljuks, right? And from the Seljuks, came the Kai, right? Then the Ottomans came, and then they started to develop. And it was when they conquered the lands of the Byzantines. Because remember the Rome now, right? You had Rome in Italy, it died. So Rome became Greek. Constantinople became the capital of Rome. So when the Quran is talking about Ghulibat Rome, it said Rome has been defeated. Surah Rum, the chapter of Rome, that's not Italy it's talking about. It's actually talking about Constantinople. Because it was the Byzantines who were the Romans at the time. But many of the priests from Italy, they moved to Constantinople. And they built the glory of Christendom. It was the Hagia Sophia. That's the reason why they can't stand it up until today when Muslims are calling the Adhan and making Jummah Salat in the Hagia Sophia. They can't handle this, man. Because this was the greatest building they ever had. But you know what's not known by a lot of people? Since we're studying our Mediterranean? Some of the Greek church started struggling against the Roman church, what was left of it. And the Romans from Europe, that's Romania and Serbia, and some of these people, they attacked the Greeks. And they attacked Constantinople. Up until today, there's a difference between Orthodox Christians and Roman Catholics. The Roman Catholics have Christmas on the 25th, but Orthodox is on January 7th. That's Christmas for them, right? Not December 25th. Because December 25th is like Mithras and other holidays. Doesn't mean anything to anybody really. So, when they attacked the Orthodox people, they didn't want the Turks at first, but then when the Turks took over and allowed them to worship, did not slaughter them, they said, okay, we like this. And they gave Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, Rahimahullah, Mehmet, he became the leader of the Orthodox Church. So he had the right to appoint the bishop of the Orthodox Church. Okay? And when so many Muslims were pouring into Istanbul, they changed the name to the City of Islam, right? Istanbul from Constantinople. They started making salat here. This is the biggest building around, right? So then the Christians said, okay, we're going to sell you this building. So they they bought this building, and they have the deed to the building up until today. You know, there was a big uproar when last year Erdogan said, this is going to be officially a masjid, we're going to make salat in here. Everybody said, no, you can't do this. No, they had the deed. The Christians sold it to them. And a lot of people don't realize what actually happened. Okay? So, the Hagia Sophia was the glory. Constantinople was the glory. And Constantine, he started to use as their main symbol the cross. And even in the Encyclopedia Britannica, this is an old quote, now we Google everything, right? If you grew up in my generation, you got Encyclopedia Britannica, you know, whatever, but now you Google everything. But even in this, it says the use of the cross as a religious symbol in pre-Christian times, see it, was almost universal and often connected with nature worship. I didn't say that. That's what they said. But Constantine instituted the cross. His followers were with a red cross. He started that. That's why the Swiss, up until now, you see the red cross, right? Red cross is a medical thing too. It started with Constantine. So Constantine did a lot of things. And Constantine wanted to mix everything together now. He was a sun worshiper himself, but he wanted Christianity, or a form of Christianity, to be the dominant religion of the whole Roman Empire. That's what his intention. He wanted to unite everybody together. Politician, right? The politician who can unite all sides together and everybody's happy, that's the real politician. And this is what he wanted to do. One of the problems that he had is that, you know, he wanted to bring concepts of sun worship and the other things, but there were some Christians who believed in one God. They were Christians. And the leader of that group was called Arius. And later on I'm going to show you some other names, but there were other people also who believed, you know, in one God. But Arius was the main person. Now, Constantine, he wanted to unite Christianity. So in 1313, okay, this is not in the notes here. In 313, in 313 AD, Constantine did a law called the Edict of Milan. He legalized Christianity. Because before that time it was illegal in Roman lands. So he legalized it. And in 325, he called a meeting in a place called Nicaea. Now you see where Constantinople is? And then you can see Nicaea. Nicaea was the capital before Constantinople. Today in Turkey it's called Iznik. If you look on the map, you won't see Nicaea. But you'll see Iznik. Yeah, Iznik. Okay? And so he called what is called the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. This is a very significant conference. He gathered the bishops together, all of the information from the Romans, bishops, from the Greeks, and they had a big council. And it was during that council that they put together the Bible. Now, the word Bible means, in Latin, it means bibliothek. A Bible is a library. Okay, it's a library, bibliothek, because it has Old Testament, it has New Testament, it has Psalms, it has stories. It's like a library of religious information. We wouldn't do that. We separate. We say Torah, Zabur, Injil. We separate because they're all books given to different prophets. Constantine, he wants unity, right? He's going to put everybody together. He's even going to get the Jews in there too because he got the Old Testament there too. Okay? Then, but there were some other gospels. The gospel according to Barnabas. There were other gospels. And so they chose the four Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for the New Testament, and they put the others in a vault. They hid them away. And there may even be some of them in Rome today, hidden deep in their chambers, that they will not allow anybody to see. This Barnabas one came out. We're not sure whether what came out is the real gospel of Barnabas or not. But something came out. And it was blowing, everybody was really amazed at this. Okay? So, in any event, the Council of Nicaea, they had to decide on Aqidah. What is our belief? Is our belief Trinity? Now remember the Trinity concept of Plato and Horace and so many. Is it Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit? Or is it unity? Right? Tawheed. And they chose Trinity. And anybody who disagreed with them was considered to be heretic. They used the word heretic. And that's, we would say today, murtad, apostate, or khawarij. Like bad words, right? Like you're an apostate, heretic. And I've seen this, I've tested this before. If you speak with an honest theologian, and you say, what about Arius? What do you think about Arius in the Council of Nicaea? And they will say, he's a heretic. That's the first thing they'll say. But then if you ask him, why was he a heretic? Then you'll see it's because he believed that God was one and Jesus was a prophet. He was not the Son of God. And so because of that, they considered him to be a heretic. And they poisoned him in 336 AD. He was killed. And his followers were spread all around the place. Now, the edict came from the Council of Nicaea that possession of any other gospel was considered to be an offense. Unitarians are heretics. Over 1.5 million people were killed. 1.5, and in those days, that's a big number. Nothing today. But in those days, that is major. 1.5 million people were killed. The official Roman Catholic Church had to be subservient to the Roman Empire. So you see what they did. They now made the church part of their power. It's the power structure. You see? And they combined it all together. So this is something well thought out that they did. 1.5 million people. Those who could run, they would flee. And they were Unitarians who took refuge. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he met a monk. It's actually Bahira. This is a mistake there. It's Bahira. Okay? You remember when the Prophet ﷺ was traveling with Abu Talib on one of the journeys as a young man, and they ran across a monk. The monk was on a hill waiting for something. And he saw this caravan coming with a cloud over it, shielding it. And he stopped them and he said, this is in the books of Sirah. And he stopped them and he said, like, okay, everybody come and eat. I'll cook some food. And then he said to Abu Talib and them, he said, is everybody here? And they said, no, there's a little boy, this boy Muhammad, he's over taking care of the animals or whatever. They said, no, bring him. And so they brought everybody and he looked at Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. There were certain things about him. He actually has a mark on his back, like a birthmark on his back. And then, Bahir tested them. And he said, say, eat in the name of your gods. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would say, in the name of Allah. He wouldn't say the gods. He saw certain things about this boy. And he went to Abu Talib and he said, do not take him to Syria. Go back with him. Because if the Yahud see him, if they know about him, they're going to kill him. Because this is the chosen one. Who was this monk? Why is he waiting on the hill? Where did he get his ideology from? It's clear to us now. These are the followers of Arius and other people who refuse to accept the Council of Nicaea. You get it? They refused to accept it. There's another one in the Sierra, Nestora. And you see a group of Christians called Nestorian Christians too. Okay? Question?
Why did they choose Trinity over one God if they wanted to unite the region?
Well, Trinity, if you choose the one God, the only group that you're going to satisfy are the Jews. But if you choose the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, then you get the Mithras people, you can get Plato's people, you can get a lot of things in that one. You see? It's all politics, right? It's politics. Because Constantine was a sun worshipper. And the strongest historians say he died as a sun worshipper. He did not die as a Christian. But he was a politician, and he brought together Christendom. And another important point, which is not going to be here, it was in 380. 380. There was another emperor, his name is Theodosius. Theodosius. 380. He made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. You see, what Constantine did was he legalized it, and then he got the foundations, he got the book, he got the Aqidah, and everything, but there was still a lot of groups around. Theodosius came along and said, now I'm going all the way. So from 380 it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And that's a big thing. Because the Romans controlled the Mediterranean. That's massive, man. Okay? Question?
Sorry, one quick follow-up, sorry.
Yeah.
At that council, when they made the 4 books of the Bible, is that officially when you can say that we lost the original Bible?
No, well, see, in those books that they had scrolls. The books that they use are in Greek. They don't have the original ones. Now, what they had in their vault, Allah knows best. But the original book would have been in Aramaic or in Hebrew. And they don't have that. So they pieced together what they had, and they claim it's all revelation. Now, this is a deep point, which makes another connection for us. Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, in the last part of his life, he sent letters to the kings. He sent letters to the kings of the world, and letters to the leaders of Arabian Peninsula. So one of the kings was Heraclius. He was Azim of Rome. So he was the emperor of Rome. And this is a picture of the actual letter, that he wrote. It's in the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul. And this is what he said. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, from Muhammad, the Messenger of Allah, to Heraclius, the Emperor of Rome. Peace be upon he who follows the guidance. As to what follows, verily I invite you with the call of Islam. Accept Islam and you will be saved. Accept Islam and Allah will give you 2 rewards. If you turn away, then you will be accountable for the sins of the Arisiyin. Now, this is the word used inside of the text. And he ends with the Quranic ayah. I'll just go to the translation because of time. This is, O people of the book, come to common terms as between us and you, that we worship none but Allah, that we associate no partners with Him, that we erect not from among ourselves lords and patrons other than Allah. If they turn back, then say, bear witness that we are the Muslims. That's the letter. Now, the key point that historians are bringing out is this word Arisiyin. You see what he's saying? Now, some people translated this to mean fallahin, which means peasants or farmers. But some of the major historians are saying no. This Arisiyin more than likely means Aryans. That if you don't, you will be accountable for the sins of what happened to the Aryans. Those are what you could call, and I'll use this term, and one of the brothers, Fadl Suleiman, he's an Egyptian. He did his PhD thesis or master's thesis in Egypt, and his title was Muslims before Muhammad. That was his title. So who are the Muslims before Prophet Muhammad? They are the people who believe in one God. And he brought out all the Muwahidun people in different places, including the Aryans. See? So this is deep because this concept now means that part of the reason why the Muslims went up is not just military, it is also to defend the belief in one God. It's to fight oppression. Al-amru bil ma'ruf wa nahy al-munkar. You see? And to fight oppression. And he was concerned with believers in one God. And that is where the Mediterranean region, right? The whole Mediterranean region, because the Roman Empire, all the things they had done, people were suffering because of the Council of Nicaea and because of Theodosius, what he did. Because if you didn't believe now, they'll kill you. They will not accept you. So this was a major move that happened. And because of this, the Romans, Heraclius, he was afraid. So he actually sent 100,000 warriors down to attack Arabia in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet answered at a battle called the Prophet's lifetime. Tabuk. Yamama is afterwards, after his death, then they had to go back again, right? But in his lifetime, Tabuk, the Romans were coming. And they said they went out to meet them. Allah put fear in their hearts, and they never came. That's Tabuk. Okay? But it's the same Romans, because of their fear, right? They wanted to attack again, and Muslims responded to them. And then you had a series of battles that are there, Mu'tah and Yamama, and a series of battles that are there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened up territories. These territories, when they defeated the Romans in Jerusalem, in these areas, they realized they were weak because they were oppressing their people. And so they began to take all of the holdings of the Romans. And Amr ibn al-As, radiallahu anh, he was made the leader of the Muslims. And then they began to go, the Berber people, we'll be talking more about the Berber people later on in the next class, inshallah. They went right across in Egypt. That's Masjid Amr ibn al-As in Cairo, the oldest, masjid there, right? And they went right across. Look at it, right across. They took all of it, all of the Roman holdings, because they knew what the Romans were doing. So now the odds have changed. Now look at the Mediterranean now. Okay, things are changed. Okay, they took this area and began to establish Tawheed. Now, they had some resistance. We'll talk more about it next class. There was resistance, but there were many people who easily embraced. Why? Because Arius, remember Arius? He was from Libya. You're Libyans? Arius was a Libyan, like Qadi Abdul Fattah, who leads Salat for us, right? And his father, Qadi Ali. Arius was a Libyan, but he was based in Alexandria, Egypt. Okay? So the Libyan people and all the other people who follow Arius, they said, we're ready for Islam. That's what we've been waiting for, because they were trying to force us on the Trinity. So it was easy to accept Islam, and that is the reason why that area right there is solidly Muslim, and it's almost 100% Muslim up until today. Even if the person is a drunkard, a drug addict, a murderer, if you say something against Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he'll attack you, because there's something in his heart, right? They don't want to leave Islam. It's ingrained in their DNA all the way across. And so this is part of the background that we need to understand to begin to know what happened in Morocco and in Spain, because it's all connected to the region. And inshallah, next week we will continue on and look at what happened in North Africa, what Spain was, what's the actual early history of Spain, Al-Andalus, and the Mediterranean region. So I want to open up the floor now. Normally, it's all right to ask questions as I go, because that's good. But normally at the end, I will open up for questions now. So if anybody has any questions, look online and see if we have any questions there. Look online. Floor is open.
Is there any question online, brother?
Look online at the chat room and see if there's any questions that are there. Yeah, of course.
So what did the disciples of Jesus that went and spread the false religion, what did they have against it? What didn't they like?
Against Paul?
What did Paul have against Jesus that he went against him?
He actually considered himself be inspired. He thought that he was teaching the real teachings. Just like some twisted Muslims, Shaitan comes to them, in the form of a sheikh, and tells them, you're a great leader. So it was probably Shaitan there, and he thought it was Jesus, and so he thought he was inspired. He was deluded, because he died for his teachings. He's totally deluded. He said, I'm not staying with this strict stuff. Take from other religions, man. Take from other laws. You want to eat a little bit of bacon with your eggs? It's okay, man. Like, he didn't want to be stuck with this extremism. You see? He's deluded. Any other questions? Look online. Anybody online has any questions?
We haven't got any questions. No questions.
Nothing is yet. Okay. So, inshallah, we'll be closing the class because Isha comes in at 8:30. It'll be time, and inshallah next week we will continue on to look at North Africa, Andalus. Interesting history to know what the background is. Then you will understand why. When Morocco defeated Spain, Portugal, they were crying bitter tears because a lot of things have happened in this Mediterranean region here. There's a lot of things that have happened, and the average person doesn't know this because history is taken away from us. And we are now given, TikTok, and we are given other things to keep us busy without understanding, the true history of the world. Now,
Yeah, we just got a question. Tariq ibn Ziyad, can Sheikh Abdullah quick give his bloodline?
yes, Tariq ibn Ziyad is coming in the next class, but he would be from the people called Amazigh, and that is Berber. They don't call themselves Berbers, they call it Amazigh, Amazigan. Amazigan means free people. They're the original inhabitants of North Africa. Amazigh. So he was one of them. Okay? And there's different types of Amazigh people. Some of them are dark-skinned, some of them are brown-skinned, some of them are very light-skinned because they were mixed with Greeks and with other types of people as well. But they're the inhabitants of the desert region and the mountains in Morocco, Algeria, right across North Africa. That was Tariq. He was not an Arab, but he was fluent in Arabic. So inshallah, we'll close here till next class. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.